Good morning and good afternoon. This is Monica Paolini from Senza, Fili, and this is a conversation about CBRS and how CBRS is changing the way the enterprise uses wireless. Wireless is becoming much more important for the enterprise, and we're looking at how CBRS enables this change in the enterprise. And today I'm talking to Stephane Daeuble, and he works at Nokia, where he is the head of product marketing in the wireless vertical solutions. Stephane, thanks for being with us today.
Hi, Monica. Thank you.
Okay, can we start by talking about what is Nokia doing in this areas? In this area, you've been quite active.
Definitely. I mean, this is one of the new strategy from Nokia that we announced, I think, almost 2 years ago now, where we believe there is significant potential for the wireless technology that were used in the past by operators that we use every day on a mobile phone. We believe the technology such as 4G and 5G in the future has the scope to bring as much change as the mobile phone did in the last 20 years. And this, talking about a number of different enterprise segments that requires reliable wireless connectivity as part of their processes. So this is really where we started. We feel we had about, I think, 5 years ago, one of our customers in the mining industry that came to us and was willing to try our solution because they were having issue with the existing Wi-Fi to provide connectivity throughout the mine for both their workers but also the machine. And this is when we realized, after doing the installation, the capability that LTE in that particular case had in both the coverage, the reliability, and the capacity it brought for that particular customers. And from then, we felt there was a significant potential, and we now putting significant focus to bring the quality of those networks, of 3GPP networks, into a number of different industry verticals.
And I think that the timing is actually quite important here, because you started 5 years ago, but at that point, clearly there were advantages of using LTE and cellular, but we didn't really have quite the framework that we start having today. And CBRS is one tool, but not the only one. And so there is much more of talk and interest in having private LTE, which 5 years ago, you were sort of at the forefront here, realizing the problem and start working on the solution. So what has changed? It might be useful to think about what is it that's changed in the last 5 years that we are able now to do things that we were not able to do before.
Well, there's a couple of angles. I think the first one is, first of all, the realization of that need in this market. And it also meant Nokia and all the other vendors in this industry having to adapt their solutions for that, for the particular requirement. Here, when you are talking about even a very large enterprise, it's not at the same scale as what we are talking for a countrywide networks, for whether in the US or in Russia, for example. So clearly, from a scale point of view, things had to change, and the evolution of our solutions towards cloud and virtualizations of functions has meant that we have now in our portfolio solutions that are able to scale down to the smaller size networks than the typical enterprise would be requiring. So that's the number one thing. The other thing as well has been, and this is where CBRS has played a role, as well as other technologies such as multifier, is that a lot of the enterprise will work and get the private LTE networks or 5G networks using an operator's public networks, or slicing effectively the public networks of the operator for the enterprise needs. But at the same time, there's a number of them, for a number of reasons, that want to have full control of their destiny and the performance of their networks. And those ones typically requires to have spectrum to be able to deploy those technology. So this is where CBRS is a bit of a trailblazer in terms of the technology, as it allows those enterprise customers to deploy their own networks in their own campuses and have a full control of their destiny. So this is probably one of the big things. And then maybe the last thing I'll mention, and we will cover that a little bit later, is around the ecosystem. I mean, when we are talking about many different industry, as much as mining, harbors, or even factory, it's not just connectivity. A little bit like with all new technology, you need devices that enables you to connect to this, radio technology. And this is really where, it will take time. And, in the industrial market, I think in a telecom world, it's almost as fast as in the IT space in terms of innovation and product change and things like that. But in those industrial markets, some of the roadmaps are a little bit slower. So it will take time to have the ecosystems to support this technology as well. So this is some of the thing that has evolved in the last 5 years, but they still need significant changes going forward to really ensure all those different machines, also different sensors can talk the same language.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, the ecosystem, it's very important. And then when you start talking about the enterprise or specific applications, the ecosystem becomes way wider than we have for our traditional cellular networks. Now, but let's step a little bit back and talk about the spectrum and how how CBRS is specifically helping the enterprise. Clearly, CBRS is not just for the enterprise, but for the enterprise, what does it do that LTE or eventually 5G in traditional licensed band don't?
Well, so the big difference, and if you take CBRS, which applies to the US, CBRS brings the capability of enterprises to effectively register for an amount of spectrum very specific to their campuses. So if you have a factory or you manage let's say a harbor somewhere on the West Coast, then you effectively can register or you'll be able to register for a specific amount of spectrum dedicated to your site. That means that you'll be from then on able to deploy your networks and be guaranteed a certain quality of service as you won't be able to have different an enterprise using the same spectrum. So you guarantee a certain level of quality, which is the typical issue we have with Wi-Fi, where the Wi-Fi spectrum is free and anybody can just jump and use that spectrum. With CBRS, it gives you a certain quality of service by the fact that you are allocated that spectrum for your campus.
And that's great, but as you said, the big limitation of CBRS is that it's US only, right? So how does that, what we're going to learn from CBRS and the success of CBRS in the US, how does it help, or does it help in other countries? What's the impact of CBRS on the rest of the world as well?
Yeah, I think that was very important. I think CBRS really started the trend around the use of spectrum for vertical use cases. So in that regard, the US did very well, or the FCC did very well in thinking about reuse of spectrum for enterprise campuses. We've seen after CBRS, or roughly at the same time, also an initiative that Nokia was part of, which is the creation of the Multi-Fire Alliance, where Multi-Fire is effectively taking LTE and making it functions in the Wi-Fi spectrum. So effectively bringing the LTE goodness with the unlicensed benefit of the Wi-Fi spectrum. But at the same time, what we're seeing also in many markets, and a couple of countries have taken the lead on that. If we speak about Finland, for example, Finland is one market that already auctioned some spectrum for vertical in the 2.6 TD-LTE spectrum, for example. So in Finland, we're now seeing significant activity where a lot of enterprise are now deploying spectrum, LTE, using that vertical spectrum. We now have other countries such as Germany that are now looking at auctioning part of their 3.5 gigahertz, France, etc. But at the same time, we also have seen over the year that the regulator, the telecom regulator, are much more open to effectively lease or lend spectrum to vertical when required. And the final piece of the puzzle, and why we also feel that the CSP still have a very big role to play, we also see quite a few CSP that are realizing the opportunity and the value LTE brings in those industrial customers, and are also willing to work with those customers to lend them part of their spectrum for their own use case in their campuses.
Absolutely. And I was just at your meeting where, clearly Nokia has been putting a lot of emphasis on the transition to the, the fourth industrial, what you call the fourth industrial revolution, and with Future X, and how central the enterprise is in all this. So how do you think this all fits into so clearly the enterprise is going to have a bigger role. how do you see that it fits, and how does it fit for Nokia specifically? What is that you are doing differently here in terms of addressing this market?
Well, I mean, first of all, let's maybe take a step back on the role of wireless in those industry. I mean, you've talked about the industrial fourth revolution, and we believe the digital transformation is the cornerstone of that fourth industrial revolution. And if you take a look at that, then you need to connect a lot of things. You need to connect sensors, you need to connect machine, you need to empower people. And but let's make it clear. Today there is Wi-Fi in many enterprises that's used for the day-to-day business communications, such as Outlook, your email, meetings, and that's perfectly fine, even for VoIP. What we're talking about here is the technology, the wireless technology, that bring the best DNA from from both Ethernet and Wi-Fi and bring it into one. And this is what we're talking about. And really, if you take a look at this fourth industrial revolution, we feel mobile wireless technology that are reliable and IoT will be the key enablers, as it enables you to connect to really bring pervasive connectivity in those places on a layer that gives you what we call mission or business critical reliability. And that's what's important. So, let's make it clear, it's not going to replace Wi-Fi. It's going to be an additional layer that enable those enterprises and the various campuses to connect the processes which are the most important. The processes can be, connecting people, can be connecting machines, can be connecting vehicles, can be connecting robots. But these are the things that you want to ensure there's a certain levels of reliability for this connectivity. So that's why this is so critical, and that's why we feel Nokia has a key role to play. We have been selling to the vertical industry for a long time. If I remember correctly, we've got over 1,000 we call mission or business critical networks in the world today, and we really feel the next step is bringing this element of wireless in those industry for them to really leverage what IoT brings, all this digitalization to help automate their processes. And if you take a look at the various segments, the need is almost the same. This is about increasing digitalization. It's about being more flexible, being more responsive to customer, but also being more green. So all of those general mega trends are actually going towards this fourth industrial revolution, and we feel that wireless technology can bring significant capability for those enterprise customers to significantly improve their business efficiency, and this is really key.
Absolutely. So, who do you think will be deploying within the enterprise? And again, it's not just the enterprise, but within the enterprise, who do you think will deploy CBRS, and what are the needs and requirements?
Yeah, so if you take a look at the various industry that we see that are most interested, you've got a lot of heavy industry that are today not very advanced in the automation processes. So I've talked earlier about mining. Mining is clearly one of those industry. The harbor industry, so container ships, the harbors for container is one of them. Airports, interestingly as well, they've got significant operational needs for a reliable wireless technology. So all these kind of segments that have things that have a lot of need for reliable connectivity, that have things that moves in their campus, that have forklift trucks, that have trucks and things like that, are definitely some of the ones that are showing some of the greatest prospect today. At the same time, we also see significant interest from both from manufacturer in almost all different industry, the car industry or even the electronics industry. Those industry are typically, the manufacturers are typically very automated today, but what they're looking for with wireless technology is to bring them more flexibility. So if you think about it and you take a car manufacturing plant, today, typically, you have a car manufacturing plant for one type of model. So it's producing 1 or 2 or 3 models in that plant, and the production line are there, both linked to the floor. With wireless technology, you can imagine, and some of the things that we've done in our own factory, the ability to rapidly change your production from one to the other. And these are some of the things. So if you take a look at the scale of a large car manufacturing plant, having the ability to reshuffle the production line based on demand is one of the things that wireless will be able to bring them. So this is for them a little bit more about bringing that element of flexibility.
Yeah, and all of those, a lot of those requirements are really tough to meet. And in some cases, for instance, latency, security, reliability, also bring the need for the enterprise to have more control over the network, but also to do a lot of the processing locally. So you see edge computing to become more of a requirement or an advantage. So how do you see CBRS and edge computing to go hand in hand together, or?
Definitely. I mean, that's you know, as we talked about earlier about the DNA of you know, bringing the DNA of Ethernet and Wi-Fi into a single package. You know, if you think about it, where LTE and future 5G bring significant value, and CBRS as well, is that it brings a very high capacity solution. It brings one that is very reliable. It brings one that is also very secure. I mean, security is also very important today, and some of the Wi-Fi networks can be hacked. The LTE ones so far are very secure in that regards, and solutions such as MEC will help with two angles. The first one you talked about is latency. A lot of process needs very low latency. Having a local edge computing server deployed on site means you can run application directly there, which guarantee you a low latency and bring you a lot of processing power that enable you to do a number of applications such as video needs a high amount of processing. The other thing MEC is also very important for is the element of security. So for example, when you take a deployment in a specific campus, the MEC allow you to do what we call local breakout, which means the data that you want to stay within the site can stay within the site while the rest of it can flow outside. And so MEC also plays a role in that element of confidentiality of the data. So yes, we see MEC and CBRS really going hand in hand, and MEC is now part also of the 5G standard. So in that regard, it's proven its worth, and it's really going to be something that we'll see more and more going forward.
Yes, so CBRS is a really crucial time for CBRS right now. We're getting close to actually have deployment. So can you tell us a little bit about what is that you're specifically doing in the CBRS area? And yes, what's special about what Nokia is doing there?
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, on CBRS, so I think I can't remember the exact day, but we've launched pretty well the world first CBRS small cells. I think it was about almost 3 years ago now. And we've got both an indoor and outdoor solution. It relies on what we have our award-winning small cell series called FlexiZone. So we've got very capable small cells that have what we call macro parity and macro capacity. So despite the fact the boxes, and you may see one on my left just here, which is the FlexiZone Indoor Pico that supports CBRS. So we've got an indoor Pico for CBRS, and we've got an outdoor solution. Also, it provides the same capacity despite the fact it's only 3 liter as our macro BTS. So in that regard, we can support significant number of simultaneous users at the same time, whether machines or people. So those small cells that enable us really right from the beginning to start trialing CBRS technology. And we've had constantly roughly 30 to 50 ongoing trials around CBRS. It also enabled us to work with the partner. As you know, CBRS requires quite a few other elements to be able to sense the use of the spectrum, to sense the use of spectrum by the incumbent on that spectrum, some of the radar users or wireless ISPs in some of the rural places. So a lot of work had been done, working, for example, with the SAS providers. And so all of that meant we were able to be involved right up front, do a lot of integration testing and IoT testing with all the different partners and also the device manufacturers. Beyond that, as we talked about, we've got a lot of trials ongoing, and at this point in time, the only thing we're waiting for is, the finalizations of the plan by the FCC to be able to make those, networks effectively commercial, although they are private networks for those specific campus. But again, like for all the other private LTE, contracts we have so far, we are covering a wide range of industry verticals, from harbors. There's a lot of work around logistics, manufacturing, airports, and also wireless ISPs in a rural area using wireless technology to connect villages that today didn't have technology. So these are probably the initial deployment on CBRS will be focused on those industry verticals. Beyond that, if you look a little bit further, once the CBRS capability will come into day-to-day mobile phones, into the chipset that goes into yours or my phone, then one of the other angles that could be useful for CBRS is providing indoor connectivity. for example, in venue. So if you take a look at today, the operator, do invest in indoor dedicated small cells or DAS solution, for example, for the larger venue or the larger customers. But typically, the smaller or medium-sized indoor spaces, the business case is a little bit challenging. Once we've got CBRS in almost all the phones of subscribers, then what you can imagine as well is what we call neutral host, where let's take a hotel, for example, could be deploying their own CBRS networks within the hotel for their own operational needs. But at the same time, they could open that up to the subscriber to come that hotel. And CBRS also bring one innovation in that regard. It also allow that CBRS networks to be interconnected to the country's CSP core networks. And then once you've got a commercial agreement, then you can open up the CBRS network services to the subscriber of that CSP. So if you are a subscriber from an operator in the US, you can walk into that hotel and effectively, connect to the hotel networks, thinking you're still on the operator's network. So we feel that will significantly help the business model of deploying indoor connectivity, which will going to be again critical as we look at 5G going forward.
Yeah, and I think that's a big advantage of CBRS, because you can use it for both if you want to. You don't have to, but it's an option. I mean, again, it's similar, I guess, to Wi-Fi, that the enterprise might have its own Wi-Fi network, but they can open it to guest access. Exactly. And so, but from what you see, my sense is that you see that the first networks are going to be more industrial and focused on the specific industrial needs, and then eventually, once you have it in the devices, in the smartphones, then it might be more appealing to open it to guests. So, and that sort of brings back, when you talk about CBRS, oftentimes what the enterprise wants to know is, well, we have the infrastructure, but what about the devices? And clearly, you're not going to be working so much on like the sensors and all that is connected. Do you see that is going to be an issue, or because I think that in a way, because in the vertical you have specific applications, you don't have to wait for all the phones to have CBRS. You can just go right away. So that's actually a big advantage
That's true. And we shouldn't forget on CBRS that also the operator have a big play in that. I mean, they are using themselves CBRS to eventually boost up the performance or they will actually to boost the performance of their network. So in that regard, there is a big pull from the operator in the US to use also CBRS. So again, we're waiting for the CBRS PAL auction to come, but when that will happen, that will certainly drive the integration of CBRS technology into the traditional UE chipset that goes into your phone. But you were right, in terms of industrial, the benefit of the industrial space is you've got some smaller things as well where you'll need to wait for the more compact chipsets. Which we're starting to see coming, by the way. But you also have a lot of machines that you can just quite simply add what we call an IoT gateway. So you effectively make an older machine or a truck or a vehicle effectively talk to the CBRS networks by using something that's not much bigger than a phone in that regard. So it's true that in the industrial space, on top of the CSP, obviously, welcome probably a little bit earlier. For the indoor model that we talked about earlier, that hotel case or the venue case that I talked, you need to ensure a large percentage of the population actually have the capability in those phones to be able to be connected to make the most of the indoor coverage that you'll have with those CBRS neutral host networks.
Yeah, absolutely. And then again, also the enterprise will have different networks. Might have multi-fire, Wi-Fi, license. So this is going to be challenged to see how everything fits together. Now, with 5G, what's going to be the role with 5G and CBRS as we move forward?
Well, so let me take a step back on the different type of technology. There is also, maybe important to clarify also that the operator are also making use of the 5 gigahertz spectrum with things such as LAA. So LAA is effectively a 3GPP standard technology that enables them to effectively exploit the unlicensed spectrum of Wi-Fi to boost the performance of their 4G networks. So in that regard, the CSP also have effectively a technology nowadays that is being deployed to effectively boost the performance. And some of the results we see in the field are very promising, and that's why a lot of the carriers, even, for example, in the USA, are exploiting LIA. Once the CBRS auction will come, they will also deploy CBRS. And the spectrum that we're talking for CBRS, the 3.5 gigahertz, will have a big role to play in the US, because as just recently voted by the FCC, this will be a key band for 5G deployment. The same way, we on 5G is now the 3GPP standard is also looking at the unlicensed option for 5G. So effectively, so that the enterprise customers will in the future also be able to deploy their own 5G networks in their campuses. So that's still work ongoing. There's been some significant discussion also between Multifier and 3GPP to make that happen, and CBRS and 3GPP. So that's also will be something that's possible in the future.
Absolutely. So there is that's the way forward. So what should we expect, sort of in closing here? What should we expect from Nokia in the last few years within this space?
Well, I mean, we're seeing significant growth already in private LTE across the globe, and the US markets, because of CBRS, has been at the forefront of that. So we've seen significant amount of activity and interest in that market. So from our point of view, we see the enterprise market as a significant growth potential. I mean, whether you look at different forecasts, left, right, and centers, we've seen significant growth in volumes of deployments of our small cell. 5G will drive that as well significantly, but the pocket of opportunity around enterprise is absolutely huge. I mean, just take some recent census figures I've seen. If you look around the world, there are 10.7 million factories, which is quite a tremendous. So when you consider that each factory could have its own LTE networks. I mean, I was talking to not long ago to an industry player who's saying that they're planning to launch some of the LTE connected screwdriver for factory, for example. And again, why use LTE on a screwdriver or on a tightener, for example? Well, the fact is that with that technology, you can have effectively the right profile uploaded to the screwdriver throughout the factory for each of the different screw. Every single screw or bolt that you tighten will have the right setting, and that setting can go back, or the profile can go back into the factory. So if you just take those 10.7 million factory around the world, as soon as they implement those LTE connected tools, they will need those kind of private LTE, CBRS, or Multifier networks deployed there. So potentially the market is huge, and we know also the general IoT market is supposed to be a $1 trillion market, and CBRS play a big contributing role in that. And we see again, CBRS, the US taking a driving position in the private LTE space.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it's the number of enterprises, the number of things that can be usefully connected. Not just the number of things, but as we move forward and we have a network, then the value of connectivity grows in ways that we haven't even thought about. In the same way that with a phone, when we had the phone, we didn't know much about what to do about it, but we find out once you have the phone. So I think that it's going to be a lot of that kind of dynamic.
The change I use, and we see that in almost every single deployment we do, there's always a driver, an initial application driver that the enterprise is keen on establishing. And then once they've got the network, they realize that they can do so much more with it. And just take this initial mining deployment that we talked about that kicked it all off for us. The initial thing was just providing connectivity to people in the mine. But then once they had that, they realized, well, actually, maybe I can actually use that to do remote drilling. So I don't need anybody anymore. I just connect something to my machine, and I can just drill. While the thing is drilling to put the explosive inside, why to have somebody there? I can just do that remotely. Then they've realized they could also put video camera. So then they've got video camera around the mine, and they see what's happening. So they've got operational awareness for the whole thing all the time. And then they realize, well, maybe I can also connect my trucks, and now my truck are autonomous. They go and collect the gravel from one place and bring it back up. And then, well, what about the workers? Maybe I can now have wearables that monitors their fatigue and their tiredness, or if there's an accident, so I know straight away, helping the safety as well. So really, it's countless, and that's what we've seen as well, on factories within Nokia, where we've put private LTE networks, and the initial driving application was about humidity sensors. We needed to implement several hundred humidity sensors throughout the factory to improve the quality of the SMT, the mounting of components on PCBs. And again, we had the choice of either wire the 300 sensors or just use the technology. And when we put that on Wi-Fi, the Wi-Fi collapsed. So that's when we realized, okay, let's try to use our own technology, which we did. And then beyond that, now we're using private LTE for AGV, you know, those robots that bring parts from one place of the factory to the next, to connect all our test machines. So every time we change production, the test machine can just move them around, don't have to reconnect them, and more and more. So there's plenty of use case we're now discovering. In every single segment we go to of the industry, we're learning with them, we're bringing them experience, which we have done before, but there's plenty of application that, you know, IoT or this kind of private LTE with CBRS connectivity brings. You know, this mission, business critical connectivity with wireless is just absolutely important for all of them.
Yeah, absolutely. And you had the opportunity to try it in-house. So you are the best use case, because obviously, you know, you have to use, you're using your own technology.
Eating your own cake, drinking your own champagne, yeah, whatever you want to call it. That's right.
Well, Stephane, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts with us today.
Thank you very much, Monica. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.